Today we're going to be looking at a textbook definition of a closed position on the board. And if you're a little confused as to what that might be, it's essentially when the pawns create like a curtain on the middle of the board, unable to move each other. And if you can't quite picture it, we are going to see it on the board today in one of the games I've had recently. Essentially what you need to know is that a closed position is where the pawns are basically locking down the entire middle of the board, and all you're left with is to try to look for advantages with your knights and your bishops and your rooks. And today we're going to see how I try to do that in a game. So without too much meandering, let's just get straight into the game. So how did we get to a closed position? I just open up with the London, very standard, and the way we ended up with a closed position was from the get-go, my opponent decided to put his pawn here. And that was to ensure that he could keep piling on pressure on this bishop. And that is exactly what it does. But whenever that happens, I see an opening right here, targeting the rook. That is a very good move. But he can, of course, just block with this another pawn move. So we're like 6 moves into the game, and the only thing he's done is he's moved pawns. And when you have an opponent that does that, you're probably going to end up with a very close position. Now I need to slide my bishop back. You don't want to lose your bishop right now, and you cannot break in any sort of way here. So it's a fine way to shut down the London if you meet it. And now he moves yet another pawn to h5, which is actually a very good move because it prepares him to move his pawn on g4, pressuring this knight. Now the best way I can stop this is by getting my pawn to h3, because then he can't move here because I would take and I would open up my rook. Now that is not what happens. Instead I go h4, and that is bad for the following reason. Now we can just push this without being challenged on h3, and now I can't move my knight up here, which is the plan of the London, so I have to retreat my knight. And from here he continues to move pawns, and when you meet an opponent like that, it's clear that you're going to end up in a closed position, because at some point those pawns can't move anymore and the entire board just freezes. And I also move a pawn, but that is to get my bishop out. Bishop out. Bishop out. Now moving his queen out, he probably just saw, oh, I can pin his knight, so he did it. And it's not a very good move. 1, it can be blocked. 2, you cannot really pin this. Yes, if like I wanted to break here and you take, I couldn't take because I couldn't move my king, or my knight, sorry. But you also can't take this and trade. Like, you would never do that. Now, apparently it's a mistake for me to keep on developing my pawns. I think it's fine to, get this knight to be able to move again. But there is a very powerful position here for the bishop, which you definitely should take in the London. If you can get here first, you need to do that with your light square bishop. I understand that principle. I just didn't agree that that was big in accuracy. It was a small one, yes, but not a big one. And now he decides to retreat with his queen. An alright move. I mean, 2 queen moves in a row when you haven't developed anything, and then, only have moved pawns on the board. I mean, as you see on the evaluation, I am a little bit ahead, but it's not completely losing for black. Now, in this position, I move my queen out, and that is because usually in the London, you want this trade to happen so that you can open up your rook. Now, the engine actually wants me to instead play bishop out, bishop here, and then once he takes here, play your knight here. And playing your cards right here keeps your advantage, but like his best move is a5, and then I have to play a4. And I'm not comfortable to have a queen so much in the middle of your position and constantly threatening taking a rook, and also constantly threatening your entire pawn structure. So, and if you decide to, for instance, do this, and then he does this move, and then you decide to trade here, you're actually worse off according to the engine. So I don't really like having it here, and that is why instead of moving my knight, I just decide to avoid that entire attack on b2, b2, and instead of moving my bishop, I move my queen out, so we can make that trade. And that is exactly what happens. And from here, he moves a pawn. The reason why I take here, I know it seems radical, but there's 2 reasons why I actually like this move. As you can see, the only thing he's done is almost move his pawns, which means we're going to meet a closed position. Closed position being, once I move this pawn up, this cannot be moved, He probably won't move this pawn because I'm already, at this square. He can't move this pawn. He can move these two pawns, but he cannot really move these two pawns. Knights are better than bishops in close positions. You could probably already see that on board. For instance, there's not much for his light square bishop to do in this scenario, and there's really not much for my black square bishop to do in this scenario. I have a lot of places where it can be defended, but generally I just don't really need it. So instead I decide to go for equal trade of pieces. My black square bishop for his knight. He takes, and I take his pawn. And from here, he moves his light square bishop down to attack my knight because he's probably hoping that I'm going to blunder it. But I, of course, just move my knight. My idea with the knights is I want them to be at good positions in this close position where we can't really move anything. You want it to be placed where he can't really challenge you. Now, he doesn't have his black square bishop at all in the game yet, and it's going to take a while for him to get into the game. And once he gets into the game, you have so many pawns in the black squares that it's like almost impossible for him to penetrate. So my idea with the knight moves are going to try to get a knight on this square, because he's not going to move these pawns. And challenging a knight on this square is very hard for him. So that's why you want your knights over your bishops as well, because they can jump into the close position. So he then closes the position even more down. I realize I don't have to take here because I don't have to give him a strong center. So I decide not to do that, and I decide, all right, let's go for the close position. I don't want you to push this pawn, so I'm going to push my pawn before that so that you can't move this. So yeah, now he takes here. The same idea he's doing here is getting rid of my knights because knights are more powerful in a close position like this. And here, if you couldn't picture the close position like when we were going through it in the opening, this is basically a close position because you basically have like a curtain of pawns. You can more clearly see it on my side of the board. Like it's basically like the entire center is totally freeze down. These are not going to be moved for a good while. At some point there is going to be a pawn break, but and you should look for that. But I'm not really great at spotting them yet. I am working on that, however. Now he decides to get his knight in the game. I don't really know where he wants it to be placed. I mean, an ideal spot is here, just like I want my knight here. The reason why I decide to move my bishop here is to enable castling. And castling here is very powerful because I can connect my rooks on the only open file on the board. The black king can castle and do the same. So he does it actually before me, but I'm one step ahead, laddering up these rooks. Now I decide to move a pawn here. I've already decided I want this position to be closed, which means I don't want you to break with a pawn move here. He could have done that, but he decided not to do it. He offers up a trade of rooks, and I'm not really looking forward to it. I'm not really interested in it. Now I'm just trying to get my knight to this position because it's so powerful there. And this knight is very protected, and he's not going to be able to challenge this at all. We have a lot of moves here where we're challenging each other to try to find where we can break in the center. Because obviously, when you have your pawns in a curtain like we have here, what is going to be the game changer is whoever can decide to get a pawn on the back rank first. Because if this pawn falls, this pawn doesn't have a defender, a new weakness is created. This pawn is not as secure either. And, you're also targeting this, which is also a weak pawn. So you want to get into the back rank and, take these pawns out from behind. And ideally, you want to do this with having one pawn or two pawns over your opponent so that you could push for promotion. Now, that is what we're going to try to see in this game here. I decided to take here because he has to move his king. Which I'm thinking it's a fine idea, but really it's not really great for me because, he just, not only gets an equal trade, but also gets a better position for his king where he, defends his pawn. But, I then see the check down here. So now he's probably looking with his knight to create exactly the same thing as I'm doing here with my knight. And I decide to be able to stop that, I need to move my bishop down here. I could have also moved my pawn up here, which would have been much better. Reason being, if I do this, once he moves here, I can then trade pieces and win that exchange, or the exchange of pieces here. So my bishop takes and he retakes. this is probably the worst thing I've done this game. I have a knight on the extremely powerful position here where it can't be challenged. And if you look here, if you look at the knight here, look at how much space it challenges, you know? It puts pressure on the board and it does, you know, it restricts his movement. It also allows a lot of movement for my rook. So a much better move here would have been just to move the rook over here. Because how is he going to defend this? He cannot move over here with the bishop. Because then I just take with my, you know, my knight. And I'm also attacking his rook. And I'm still winning this pawn. So he cannot really defend this pawn. But sadly, I don't see it. And that's what you got to do in close positions. You got to see how you can infiltrate on the back rank without, you know, offering up a blunder or something. And you got to take these pawns out from behind. But I don't see that, and I move my knight in. My idea here was I'm attacking his rook, which I really want, you know, to out of the game. Because if I can get up a rook, I'm winning, right? But of course, I trade the most valued piece in the close position. It's an equal trade still. As you can see on the valuation, I'm still above. One of the things that I also realized making this move, it wasn't entirely blunder, is that once this trade is done, I'm looking down the barrel at this. But it's not very hard for him to defend it, right? And it's not like I can attack this pawn as well either. So that is exactly what happens. He just defends it. Now, when you're frozen this much down on the board, any pawn moves you can do really puts you at a disadvantage. You cannot really move your rook, because if you do that, he can move his rook. And you don't really want to lose the only open file. This is the most important file to get right now, because it's the only way you can attack from behind with your rooks. So me controlling it is actually what gives me the you know, better position according to the valuation. So now I know it's time to move the king. It's time to king walk, baby, all right? Now, I just completely give up, you know, what I just said for a useless move that doesn't really do anything. Here I should just continue to move my king. But, I don't know. I was hoping to break here so that when it takes, I can do this and then also challenge this. And that is exactly what happens. What I'm really trying to do here is simplify the game, because with this many pawns frozen down in the center of the board, it can get really complicated. And I think king moves are some of the hardest thing to do in the end game, because it really determines whether you win or you lose. And because of that pressure on moving the king, I did not trust myself enough to realize that I would find the correct moves in order to win this game. So that was why I decided to move the rook. And now takes, and he retakes. This is a very weak pawn. My pawns are not so weak. They're actually connected, all of them. And now I also take this. You know, it's looking pretty good for me. Now it goes down for a pretty useless check. And I go up here, which, you know, defends all my pawns. Ideally, you would want, you know, to be able to go here to defend all these three. But you cannot really fianchetto your king here. Now I do probably the stupidest thing I've done this game. I know I said that with the knight, but this is really this really takes the cake, all right? Trust me. Moving the king here is such a dumb move. I cannot even comprehend to do it. Just moving your king here would have been better, because the one objective you have in close positions, it is not letting your opponent get this pawn behind the ranks, all right? That pawn is what keeps it all together. He is holding the line down, and now you just lost him. I know you're technically trading for equal pieces, but that was already a very weak pawn, and that was really not, you know, worrying at all. Now, pushing your pawn here is just threatening promotion, forcing his king to go over here, and that means that you could probably have a free king to, you know, challenge his last standing pawns, all right? But I don't do that. I'm thinking the only thing I can do here is just go for equal pawn trades, and that is exactly what happens. I also only have 1 minute back on the clock, which is not great in this game. He is right now challenging my entire structure. Now I should move my king up to, you know, try to preserve these two pawns and not just go pawn hunting, because he can't push these either way, right? Now, that's not what happens. I decided to take, and the reason why that's so bad is these pawns were pretty strong. And now they're pretty weak. Endgames is the most complicated part of chess, in my opinion. it can have so many variations, and opposed to openings, with openings you could know and learn variations, but the end game variations are just so much more complex because you have so many more moves that can happen, right? But now I just decide, okay, I need to fucking go for this. I'm still challenging this, but you know, that loses the last pawn, and now you're actually not up a pawn anymore. But I'm still thinking I can just keep pushing this, no? And get my king over here to block this so that he can't threaten promotion. But of course, my last pawn falls, and I just completely fuck up here, and I take his pawn, losing my rook. And yeah, these 4 mistakes that I made, moving the knight, moving the rook, blundering the rook, getting his rook to take on my back rank is really what lost me this game. So anything you can learn from this in case of close positions is you have to keep calm, and you have to not let your opponent get behind on your back ranks, because then your pawns will fall and your structure will die.
Raindrops are falling on my head, and just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed, nothing seems to fit. Those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling.